Welcome to the Market Mystics podcast. I'm Joshua.
I'm Kim. Let's dive in. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This is going to be a super interesting conversation. I don't know what we're talking about. We talked about 12 topics, and I just hit record after I said, I don't know what we're talking about. I'll leave it up to you, Josh. So, Josh, take it away.
Yeah, welcome everybody. If you're just listening to the audio, Kim is over here laughing because that's exactly what happened. We were like, what do you want to talk about today? And had this idea and had conversations about a few different. She goes, I don't exactly know. I'm just going to hit record and you can pick. So welcome to the show. Yeah, I think, okay, at least several of the topics that we proposed, and we could go into detail on any of them, but have to do with really developing your personal relationship with all of your parts with God, and not just taking the prescription of what somebody else said and did as your own, well, it worked for them, it's going to work for me. And it may. And I would say some of this stems from, so the last episode that we did was an interview with Arun Bolchadani. And he made a comment about how when people look at him and say, wow, you've got this autoimmune disease to go in remission, that's a big deal, doesn't happen very often, was it this thing that you did? And he's like, I don't know, maybe a little. And they're like, well, was it this thing that you did? And he's like, it's hard to tell. And because it's a combination of 1,000 things that he did, but that all stemmed from building relationship with your body and saying, what is it that you need to process through some of this? And the reason that he is not so vocal about one or the other is because it may not be that for you, and it's never just one thing, it's this whole journey. And so, like, Kim and I were talking today about like coffee and sweets, and even like medication. Like, there may be times where in one person's life they actually really need to take a pharmaceutical medication, and for somebody else, their neighbor, that could be exactly the wrong option for them. Maybe they need a different treatment,
Even with the
and
same condition.
even with the same condition. And to me, the root of that comes from, I think the majority of the things that happen in your body regarding dis-ease come from, they stem from a deeper place. And maybe some of it could be your, like, the weight of different genetics that you carry, or emotional traumas as a child or an adult. And so it may outwork itself in the body in a very similar way, but it doesn't mean that the root of it actually is the same. And so it may need a different treatment for it. So we were just kind of talking about that, and some specific examples in our lives of like, hey, this is what I was dealing with, and God told me to handle it this way. But that could be totally opposite from the way somebody else does. And so that's kind of like a broad view of the conversation we've been having this morning before Kim hit record. And I just think it's really interesting because we've talked about this a lot, like especially in our financial topics. we talked, like, I know we've talked multiple times about Kim and I attending a conference where somebody was teaching on cryptocurrency, and the answers that they were giving people to how to deal with certain situations were different than the answers Kim and I were sitting on the couch going, oh no, you do this and you do this. And then the answer that the speaker gave was totally different, was exactly the opposite, actually. And both of us, I think, okay, I'll speak for myself. At first, I was like, what are they doing? They don't know what they're talking about.
Same.
And then the longer I sat with it, I was like, actually, that answer would work in some situations. And maybe that is the correct thing in some situations. And so when we're talking about health, or I mean, that was the topic we were talking about this morning, was taking care of our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is good for me may not be the right answer for Kim, because our emotional and physical traumas and the way that is expressed in the body, like, has different roots. And so, like, the reason I need something is not the same reason Kim needs that same thing. And I just think that that's important to really pay attention to. It's all part of this journey of really connecting with yourself, really, like, letting your body have a voice, letting your soul have a voice, letting your spirit have a voice. What do you think, Kim?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in the beginning about none of this being prescriptive.
Mm.
And I think so many times in our societies, someone finds something that works for them, and then it gets prescribed and duplicated among other people, and then it doesn't work as well. And then there's all this questioning coming into place, and even like questioning of yourself and things. And I think what you're talking about is so really important. Like, the important piece in all of these things, in finding how to hear the voice of your body, how to hear the voice of your soul, how to hear the voice of your spirit, and then eventually getting them to work together and come into agreement. Um, it's so very important, but it's very individual,
Mm.
and it's going to rely on more than someone else having an experience and you trying to duplicate it. And you even mentioned like pharmaceuticals, like drugs and stuff. And I have been for years like pretty anti pharma. I'll just say that. But we were talking about this morning, and if we can zoom out and look at the people, the individuals, the humans that are behind developing some of these things, or trying to find solutions to help the human condition, right? So, um, highly addictive pain medication, as we would see it now, if we go back to the root of it, is the person who started developing it evil because they're trying to get people addicted, or were they genuinely trying to find a solution for pain management and actually improve the state of humanity? All of the stuff that went on after that, I think, is what has then twisted it and made things into what we know it as now. And then we look at it as evil. But even on the show, we've talked so much about like origins of things. And like there are things that Christians don't want to touch in creation, or like principles that were created by God that now is like taboo for Christians because the new age people use it and now we can't use it.
Mm.
But it was still created by God. It has just been twisted sometimes. So, do we have the ability to hold it and even start the process of untwisting it? Or skip that process and just go back to its origins and use it in its purest form? you know? And I think kind of that's what this whole topic you're presenting is about. We are coming off this conversation with Arun, and it's a really interesting thing because he was talking about his autoimmune disorder that he's been dealing with, and I'm probably saying that incorrectly, an autoimmune disorder that he's been dealing with. And like what he's been doing with diet and all of these things to nourish his body into health, essentially. I think that's probably a good breakdown of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really interesting hearing him talk about this because probably 5 years ago, I started on a similar journey. I also have an autoimmune disorder that I'm dealing with and trying to get my body back to a state of health. But the interesting thing to me is that the way that I started on that journey, first of all, I tried to come up with all these different solutions and none of them worked. Like none, zero. And the pharmaceuticals that my doctor put me on were not working. And so finally, my sister was like, well, have you asked the Lord? And I was like, of course I've not asked the Lord. Duh. And so then I asked the Lord, right? And he kind of broke it down and gave me things to do, essentially like a protocol for the healing of my thyroid. And so I started doing those things. And it's interesting because people noticed. You could see a physical difference in a short amount of time with what I was doing. And the hard part about it is that people go, oh, I see these results in you. What are you doing? I want to do it too. And it always gave me pause. And always I would tell people some of what I was doing. And I would say, I'm not going to recommend it for you. This isn't a prescription. This is what was assigned to me to do for my specific, I don't know, issues I'm dealing with in my body and things I'm trying to get aligned. But that doesn't mean it's for you. I would really encourage you to go seek for yourself. And some people sought for themselves, and some people tried to do the little things that I told them I was doing, and it didn't work for them, and they were shocked. But I think so much of this, like we talk about perspective so much, and it just is so important. Like we also talk about relationships. So important to have your own individual relationship and be able to hear properly. And one of the things that I was doing in that protocol, essentially, that I was given to start healing the autoimmune disorder was to start listening to my body. Number one, be kind to my body, which was a new concept to me. I'm just being honest, and I've come a long way, but it was being kind to my body and it was listening to it. And so I took time and I started learning what my body was really saying and needing, and then feeding it the things that it needed. Like I didn't know this. My body loves greens, but my brain and my pleasure center doesn't love greens. And so I wasn't eating very many of them because it didn't feel good to my psyche. You know what I mean? It wasn't like the comforting stuff. But when I actually started listening, there were all these different things that my body really wanted and needed. And then it started healing. Crazy. I feel like I went on a like real long tangent with that, but there's my whole thing.
I think at the root of it, it's simply we can learn from one another. And I think that that is important. But what I hope you learn from one another is methodologies for connecting to yourself and to God. Because the way that's outworked might be different. And that's what I'm hearing in all these conversations, whether it's financial or whether it's physical health. Like it I can help you. If I can help you connect with yourself, you'll be able to hear the solution. But if I tell you what I did and you just try to copy that, it may or may not work. It might work. And sometimes the solution can be generic enough that it's just helpful in general.
Right.
Like, I just recently heard somebody talk about this, and I think it's really important. And they were talking about helping people who kind of are in living in chaos. And they made the comment like, it any type of structure and order that you give that person will have measurable benefits in their life because they've been living without anything. But that doesn't mean that it's like the optimal thing for them. It's like you give a starving person, like, I don't know, a Twinkie or something. It's going to have temporary benefits because they were starving and they had nothing. Doesn't mean it's the best solution for them long term. But you gave them something that they needed, something that they were desperately lacking. And so, like, it sort of makes me think about we did an episode quite a while ago called like Make Your Bed, and it was just about, like, are you taking responsibility for your life? Do you wake up in the morning and make your bed and get dressed and like give yourself some structure so that your energy can properly flow? And that's kind of what I think about this stuff when we're talking about health or all sorts of different things. Like, sometimes if you don't have, like, if you have no structure around what you're eating, any structure around what you're eating will have a temporary benefit. And I think that's why you see people yo-yo diet, is because they have no structure and then they give some structure and they see some benefit, but then long term that really wasn't what their body needed, and so, or wasn't the root of what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so they revert back to nothing, and then they try something else, and then it's, well, the diet didn't work for me. And, well, maybe your body wasn't actually asking for a diet. Maybe it was asking that you deal with, like, the trauma you had with your mom and how she cooked. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's all sorts of different reasons, but you may see temporary benefit from just providing structure where there is no structure. And that, like, when I heard that comment, it really jumped out to me because I was like, oh, like, that actually really connects, because I think it shows, like, we have this internal need of, like, I'm broken, I need to be fixed. And so I'm going to try what worked for that person. And in some ways, what you're doing is just avoiding actually looking at the real problem. And that's where real healing and wholeness comes from.
I'm thinking of something you touched on right before we started recording. And I think about some of these yo-yo diets, like what you're talking about. And you get to a point where you're like, I need structure. And so then you implement structure, and it is like a master. And it tells you what you can and cannot do. And it can be very rigid. I think a lot of people will, like, in those yo-yo diets, it's like super rigid, and then it swings to super free.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I am someone who is for freedom, but I'm also someone who is definitely, I need structure. And I think that's where you see the yo-yo. It's like these extremes of these things. Like, you're super restrictive and then you're super free, and then your body kind of doesn't know what to do with it. So I think, I wonder, where's the middle ground, and how do you have structure without the rigidity and like the slave driver kind of attribute to it, I suppose. And then even within that structure, how do you have structure, but still have freedom and grace, right?
Mm.
And so then it doesn't look like, and doesn't kind of display itself as this unhealthy system of like punishing your body and then like free for all, right?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, eating disorders are, there's one that's built around that whole structure of like the super rigid and then the super freedom and that swing back and forth. But how do we get to the middle ground? And I would even say that in most of these concepts we're talking about, how does it have to be so strict that there is no grace, but also does it have to be so free that there is no structure?
Mm.
Can we find freedom and structure, I suppose?
I think ultimately what you're looking for is lessening the pendulum swing,
Yeah, that's it.
bringing balance to the situation.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
interesting. I do think too, there are times when the superstructure is needed,
Hmm.
but not to the point that you're punishing yourself,
Right.
right? Like there is something very important about being kind to yourself, even when you're going through a process. I have a 17-year-old son who's really into jujitsu, which is a martial arts of forms, right? And he, well, he was going through puberty. And so his weight was fluctuating in a way that he didn't like. And then he started training a lot with this that he's really interested in and saw some weight coming off and his body start like being structured in a way that he liked better. And he started getting really rigid with his diet because he liked the trajectory that like where this was going, right?
Hmm.
And I've had so many conversations with him because I don't want him to get to a place of doing like working out hard, like training hard and being super strict with his diet as a way to punish himself, because that's kind of
Mm.
how he would talk about it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I hate this or I hate that. I'm going to do this and it's going to work. And I'll do it until it's where I want it to be. And so we've had so many conversations about you can have the same end result. You can eat the same things. You can train just as hard, but with a position of loving your body and
Mm.
like being kind and graceful to your body, without having it to be like hitting part of yourself against the other part of yourself. And I think so much of this is nuanced. We've used this word so much this year, I feel like. Um, but it's positional about where's your mind and where's your heart with this stuff. And it may outwork the same, but it's completely different.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think I think this is such a key to walking into maturity. And it's really not that hard, but sometimes the journey, like you can deal with some really hard things. But actually like, learning to love your neighbor as yourself requires you first start loving yourself. And so it's like, man, it's really not a hard thing to start that conversation. But sometimes it is a hard thing because you deal with some things that maybe you've held for a while and it's tough to not do that. But I do think that what we're talking about today, it's the beginning of It's the beginning of stepping into what all of us have been wanting to step into.
Right. And it's something that someone else can't do for you. And that might be the most daunting thing of all.
Right.
Like,
Someone else might be able to walk beside you. Like that's what Kim and I have said, whether it's like people's spiritual journeys or their financial journeys. Like we offer coaching on our website, Upper Room Capital Development or upperroomcd.com. We offer coaching, and what we say in that coaching is we're not here to tell you how to manage your finances or how to deal with your spiritual things. We're here to walk beside you and help you build confidence in that journey. And like that's what I want from a community, is a community who can remind me of who I am and remind me of the trajectory I've been on, but not necessarily tell me this is what you're supposed to do, this is what you're supposed to do, this is what you're supposed to do.
I don't think we need prescriptions from each other. Like, worry about your own prescriptions.
Yeah.
But support one another as you're walking through them.
For sure.
Right? I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think it's good.
Okay. Well, shall we wrap it up there?
I think it's a good spot.
Let's do it. Okay. You guys have a great day. We'll see you next time.
See ya. Thank you for sticking around. Listen for new episodes every Monday and Thursday. Find us on all social media platforms by searching for Market Mystics. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. Visit upperroomcd.com where you can find more information about the hosts, projects, and guests. Go deeper by booking a coaching appointment focused on redefining identity and wealth in your life. See you next time.